never lie to yourself. Because the moment you lie to yourself, you become weak without realizing it. You tell yourself you will start tomorrow. You tell yourself you tried your best. You tell yourself it's not your fault. You tell yourself you don't care. And slowly, without noise, without drama, without anyone noticing, you begin to lose control over your own life. The world doesn't defeat you first. Your self-deception does. Every excuse you whisper inside your mind becomes a brick in the wall between you and your potential. And the dangerous part, no one can correct you. No one can argue with you, because it's happening inside your own head. When you lie to yourself, you feel temporary comfort, but you sacrifice long-term power. You trade growth for ego protection. You choose illusion over progress. And today we're going to break that pattern completely. Because if you master the ability to face yourself honestly, brutally honestly, you unlock discipline, clarity, emotional control, confidence, and real success. But if you don't, you stay average. So ask yourself, right now, where are you lying to yourself? Asterisk, lying to yourself does not begin with a dramatic denial of reality. It begins with small, quiet distortions that feel harmless and reasonable. You do not wake up one morning and decide to sabotage your own growth. Instead, you slowly develop a habit of protecting your comfort over protecting your potential. You tell yourself you will start tomorrow because today was too stressful. You convince yourself that scrolling for hours is just relaxing. You say you are waiting for the perfect time, the perfect mood, the perfect opportunity. None of these statements sound dangerous. In fact, they sound logical. That is why self-deception is so powerful. It disguises itself as logic. It does not shout. It whispers. It does not attack you openly. It slowly reshapes how you interpret your own behavior. And once that interpretation becomes biased in your favor, you stop evaluating yourself honestly. Instead of asking, "Am I disciplined?" you ask, "Do I deserve a break?" Instead of asking, "Am I improving?" you ask, "Is this good enough for now?" The focus shifts from growth to justification, from correction to comfort. The silent habit of self-deception is built on emotional avoidance. Most lies we tell ourselves are designed to protect us from discomfort. Admitting that you are procrastinating feels uncomfortable because it forces responsibility. Admitting that you lack consistency feels uncomfortable because it damages your self-image. Admitting that you are afraid feels uncomfortable because it challenges your pride. So instead of confronting these truths directly, you create softer narratives. You say you are thinking carefully when you are actually overthinking out of fear. You say you are being patient when you are actually hesitating out of insecurity. You say you are protecting your peace when you are actually avoiding necessary confrontation. These narratives allow you to feel stable in the moment, but they slowly weaken your ability to hold yourself accountable. Over time, the gap between what you say and what is real becomes wider, and the wider that gap becomes, the more disconnected you become from your own potential. Self-deception also becomes habitual because it protects identity. Every person has a mental image of who they are. You might see yourself as hardworking, intelligent, strong, kind, disciplined, or ambitious. When your actions do not match that identity, tension appears. That tension is uncomfortable. You have two choices in that moment. Change your behavior to match your identity, or change your interpretation of your behavior so it still fits your identity. Growth requires the first option. Self-deception chooses the second. Instead of admitting, "I did not work hard today," you say, "I work better under pressure." Instead of admitting, "I reacted emotionally," you say, "They pushed me too far." Instead of admitting, "I did not prepare enough," you say, "The situation was unfair." By adjusting the story, you protect your self-image. But protecting your self-image at the cost of truth creates weakness. Because now you are not improving the behavior. You are defending it. Another reason self-deception becomes silent and dangerous is repetition. The first time you justify something, you might feel a small awareness that you are bending the truth. The second time, it feels easier. By the 10th time, it feels normal. Habits are not only physical, they are mental. The more you excuse yourself, the more automatic it becomes. Eventually, you stop noticing it. You stop questioning your patterns. You stop analyzing your excuses. Your mind begins to automatically generate explanations that protect you from blame. And once this automatic defense system is strong, growth becomes difficult. Not because you lack ability, but because you lack honest reflection. Improvement requires accurate self-assessment. If your self-assessment is distorted, your improvement strategy will also be distorted. You will try to fix the wrong problems. You will blame the wrong factors. You will focus on surface-level adjustments instead of core, behavioral changes. There is also a hidden psychological reward in self-deception. It gives immediate emotional relief. When you tell yourself that something is not your fault, you feel lighter. When you tell yourself that you deserve comfort instead of discipline, you feel justified. That relief feels good in the short term. The brain prefers short-term comfort over long-term gain. But every time you choose relief over responsibility, you reinforce the pattern. You train your mind to escape discomfort instead of using it as feedback. And discomfort is feedback. It tells you where you are lacking effort, courage, or clarity. When you silence that feedback with comforting lies, you remain unaware of your weaknesses. And unacknowledged weaknesses do not disappear. They grow quietly. The most dangerous aspect of the silent habit of self-deception is that it isolates you from correction. When you lie to others, they can challenge you. They can question you. They can expose inconsistencies. But when you lie to yourself, there is no external resistance. The narrative feels internally consistent because you created it. You become both the storyteller and the audience. And if you are not disciplined, you will believe your own story. This creates a closed mental loop where growth rarely enters. You start believing that your progress is enough, even when it is minimal. You start believing that your effort is maximum, even when it is inconsistent. You start believing that circumstances are the main barrier, even when your habits are the real obstacle. Over time, this silent habit shapes your standards. Standards are not determined by what you say publicly. They are determined by what you tolerate privately. If you tolerate excuses in your own mind, your standards will gradually drop. You will accept average performance. You will accept incomplete effort. You will accept delayed action. And because this decline is gradual, you will not notice the shift immediately. You will still believe you are ambitious. You will still believe you want success. But your daily behavior will not reflect that desire. This mismatch creates frustration. You will feel capable of more, yet unable to reach it. That frustration often leads to external blame. You may blame timing, people, resources, or luck. But the root cause remains internal, the silent habit of self-deception that prevented you from confronting yourself honestly. Breaking this habit begins with awareness. You must start catching your justifications in real time. When you feel the urge to explain away your lack of effort, pause. When you feel the need to soften the truth about your discipline, pause. Ask yourself directly, am I describing reality or am I protecting my ego? That question alone can begin to dismantle the silent pattern. Because once you see self-deception clearly, it loses some of its power. It cannot hide in logic anymore. It cannot disguise itself as patience, balance, or self-care when it is actually avoidance. And when you begin to replace comforting stories with honest evaluation, you strengthen something far more valuable than temporary relief. You strengthen because the person who refuses to lie to themselves builds a foundation of clarity, and clarity is the first step toward real, lasting growth. And clarity is the first step toward real, lasting growth. But when clarity is avoided, the cost does not appear immediately. It builds slowly, quietly, beneath the surface of your daily routine. The hidden cost of ignoring your own truth is not instant failure. It is gradual stagnation. You may still wake up every day. You may still complete tasks. You may still tell yourself that you are trying. On the outside, nothing looks broken, but inside, momentum begins to fade. When you ignore your own truth, you disconnect from accurate self-measurement. You begin to overestimate your effort and underestimate your weaknesses. This distorted self-perception becomes the foundation of your decisions. And decisions built on distortion rarely lead to real progress. When you refuse to confront your own reality, you start misdiagnosing your problems. If you are not consistent, but you convince yourself that the real issue is lack of opportunity, you will keep searching for new opportunities instead of fixing your discipline. If you are afraid to take risks, but you label it as being careful, you will continue staying small while believing you are being wise. If you lack preparation, but you call it bad luck, you will repeat the same mistake without correction. This is how years pass without significant growth. Not because you lack intelligence, not because you lack ability, but because you never identified the true source of your stagnation. Honest self-assessment is like a compass. Without it, you may still move, but you will not move in the right direction. There is also a deeper internal cost, the erosion of every time you tell yourself you will do something and then justify why you did not, a small crack forms in your self-trust. You may not notice it immediately, but repetition makes it visible. When you promise yourself to wake up early and you do not, when you promise to study seriously and you delay, when you promise to control your emotions and you react impulsively, your mind records it. And when your mind records repeated broken promises, it stops believing you. That is when discipline becomes harder. That is when motivation fades quickly. Because at a subconscious level, you no longer see yourself as someone who follows through. Confidence does not grow from positive thinking. It grows from evidence. If your actions repeatedly contradict your intentions, your confidence weakens. Ignoring your own truth also creates internal conflict. Deep inside, you often know when you are not being fully honest with yourself. There is a quiet awareness that you could do more, try harder, focus deeper. When you consistently suppress that awareness, tension builds. That tension can turn into frustration, anxiety, or irritability. You may feel restless without understanding why. You may feel dissatisfied even when nothing major is wrong. That dissatisfaction often comes from the gap between your potential and your honesty. You sense that you are capable of more, but you are not demanding more from yourself. And that gap is uncomfortable. Instead of closing the gap through effort, many people try to silence it with distraction. more entertainment, more scrolling, more excuses. But distraction does not remove the gap. It only delays confrontation. Another hidden cost is lowered standards. When you regularly accept your own excuses, your internal standards quietly decline. The first time you tolerate incomplete effort, it feels unusual. The second time, it feels manageable. After many repetitions, it becomes normal. You begin to accept performance that once would have disappointed you. You start negotiating with your own goals. This is enough for now. I'll fix it later. At least I tried. These statements seem harmless, but they shift your baseline. And once your baseline drops, your results follow. You cannot consistently produce high-level outcomes with low internal standards. Standards are not set publicly. They are set privately, in moments when no one is watching. When you lie to yourself in those private moments, you quietly permit mediocrity. The cost also shows up in your reactions to others. When you are not honest with yourself, you become more defensive. Criticism feels like attack because it threatens the narrative you built. Feedback feels unfair because it exposes what you have been avoiding. Instead of analyzing whether the criticism is valid, you focus on protecting your ego. This slows growth even more. A person who practices radical self-honesty can evaluate feedback calmly because they are already confronting their own weaknesses internally. But a person who avoids truth experiences feedback as a threat. And when learning feels like a threat, improvement slows dramatically. Over time, ignoring your own truth can reshape your identity. You begin to see yourself as someone who almost tries, who almost commits, who almost reaches their potential. You become comfortable with partial effort. You begin to explain your limitations instead of challenging them. And the more you explain, the less you execute. Execution requires clarity and accountability. Self-deception replaces both with narratives and rationalizations. That is why stagnation feels confusing. You may feel busy. You may feel active. But busyness is not growth. Activity is not progress. Only aligned effort, built on honest self-awareness, creates real advancement. The most serious cost, however, is wasted potential. Potential is not guaranteed to turn into achievement. It requires pressure, discipline, and truth. When you lie to yourself, you remove that pressure. You make yourself comfortable with less than you are capable of. And comfort, when unearned, is dangerous. It convinces you that where you are is acceptable, even when you know you could rise higher. Years later, when you look back, the regret does not come from failure. It comes from knowing you never fully confronted yourself. You never demanded the highest version of your effort. You never required full honesty in moments of weakness. Recognizing this hidden cost is not meant to create fear. It is meant to create urgency. Urgency to question your own explanations. Urgency to measure your effort accurately. Urgency to close the gap between intention and action. Because once you understand the price of ignoring your own truth, you begin to value honesty differently. You stop seeing it as harsh. You start seeing it as protective. Protective of your standards. Protective of yourself. Protective of your long-term growth. And that shift prepares you for the next level of self-confrontation. Not just noticing your lies, but understanding why the truth feels so difficult to accept in the first place. And that shift prepares you for the next level of self-confrontation, not just noticing your lies, but understanding why the truth feels so difficult to accept in the first place. The truth feels difficult because it removes protection. It strips away the comfortable explanations you built to defend your current level of effort. It forces you to see yourself without filters. And when you see yourself without filters, you cannot hide behind potential intentions or excuses. You are left with behavior, raw behavior, repeated behavior, and repeated behavior defines reality more than any promise you make to yourself. The human mind is designed to avoid psychological pain. Physical pain is obvious and immediate, but psychological pain is more subtle. It appears when your self-image is challenged. If you see yourself as disciplined, but your actions show inconsistency, the mind experiences discomfort. That discomfort is known internally as tension between identity and evidence. To reduce that tension, you have two options. Adjust your behavior to match your identity, or adjust your interpretation of your behavior to protect your identity. The second option is easier. It requires no effort. It requires no change. It simply requires a story. And stories are powerful. They can reshape perception without altering reality. When you say, "I could do better if I really tried," you protect your identity as capable without proving it. When you say, "I'm just not in the right environment," you protect your identity as talented without demanding adaptation. When you say, "I work best under pressure," you protect your identity as competent while repeatedly procrastinating. These stories reduce discomfort instantly. They give you relief. But relief is not growth. Relief is avoidance. And avoidance, when repeated, becomes resistance. Another reason truth feels threatening is because it exposes vulnerability. Admitting you are afraid requires humility. Admitting you lack discipline requires ownership. Admitting you wasted time requires responsibility. Vulnerability is uncomfortable because it removes superiority. It removes the illusion that you are always in control. And many people prefer the illusion of control over the reality of weakness. But weakness acknowledged becomes strength in development. Weakness denied becomes weakness repeated. There is also fear attached to truth. Not fear of the truth itself, but fear of the consequences of accepting it. If you admit you are inconsistent, then you must commit to becoming consistent. If you admit you are emotionally reactive, then you must learn control. If you admit you are underperforming, then you must increase your effort. Truth creates obligation. An obligation requires discipline. That is why many people unconsciously resist clarity, because clarity removes excuses. And once excuses are removed, action becomes unavoidable. The mind also tends to compare upward. You may look at others who are performing worse and use them as justification for your current level. At least I'm doing more than them. This comparison lowers your internal standards. Instead of measuring yourself against your potential, you measure yourself against mediocrity. And that comparison protects you from discomfort. But protecting yourself from discomfort also protects you from growth. Growth lives beyond comfort. It requires friction. It requires effort that feels inconvenient. When truth highlights the gap between where you are and where you could be, that friction becomes visible. And many people step back instead of stepping forward. Emotional attachment to habits strengthens resistance as well. Even when habits are unproductive, they feel familiar. Familiarity feels safe. Breaking a habit requires uncertainty. It requires stepping into something unfamiliar. And the mind often interprets unfamiliarity as risk. So when truth points toward change, resistance appears as hesitation. You delay. You postpone. You tell yourself you will start later. But later rarely comes when clarity is consistently postponed. Resistance to self-honesty also grows stronger when ego is fragile. A fragile ego cannot tolerate imperfection. It needs to appear competent at all times. It avoids environments where flaws might be exposed. It avoids conversations that demand accountability. It avoids self-reflection that challenges comfort. But strength does not come from avoiding exposure. It comes from facing it repeatedly. When you begin practicing honest evaluation without self-judgment, resistance slowly weakens. You stop seeing truth as attack. You start seeing it as information. The deeper layer of resistance lies in fear of identity collapse. If you have always seen yourself as the smart one, admitting lack of preparation feels destabilizing. If you have always seen yourself as the strong one, admitting emotional weakness feels threatening. But identity is not meant to remain fixed. It is meant to evolve. When you cling to a fixed identity, you limit your growth. When you allow identity to update based on truth, you expand your capacity. Truth does not destroy identity. It refines it. Understanding this psychological resistance changes how you approach honesty. Instead of feeling ashamed when you notice excuses, you analyze them. Instead of reacting defensively to feedback, you evaluate it. Instead of escaping discomfort, you sit with it. That is where transformation begins. Not in dramatic motivation, but in quiet observation. You begin catching the moment your mind tries to soften reality. You recognize the protective story forming, and instead of accepting it automatically, you question it. That questioning builds strength. Because each time you override resistance, you strengthen self-control. Each time you choose truth over comfort, you increase clarity, and clarity sharpens standards. You begin to demand more from yourself, not out of self-criticism, but out of self-respect. You stop negotiating with laziness. You stop romanticizing delay. You stop tolerating inconsistency. And as resistance weakens, honesty becomes less painful. It becomes normal. At this stage, self-confrontation is no longer frightening. It becomes strategic. You understand that discomfort signals growth. You understand that exposed weakness signals direction. You understand that truth is not your enemy. It is your instructor. And when you reach this level, you are ready to move beyond understanding resistance into applying radical honesty as a daily discipline, not occasionally, not emotionally, but consistently and intentionally. And when you reach this level, you are ready to move beyond understanding resistance into applying radical honesty as a daily discipline, not occasionally, not emotionally, but consistently and intentionally. Radical honesty is not a dramatic confession or a temporary surge of self. It is structured self-observation. It is the decision to evaluate your behavior without distortion every single day. It is waking up and choosing accuracy over comfort. It is ending the day and measuring your actions against your intentions without exaggeration or excuse. This discipline separates those who remain stuck from those who evolve steadily. To practice radical honesty, you must first detach from emotional reactions to your own flaws. If every mistake triggers shame, you will avoid looking at your behavior clearly. Radical honesty is not self-attack. It is self-assessment. There is a difference. Self-attack says, I am useless. Self-assessment says, I was inconsistent today. One destroys confidence. The other builds direction. When you remove emotional drama from evaluation, truth becomes manageable. You stop fearing it. You start using it. Daily discipline begins with measurable standards. Vague goals allow vague evaluation. If you say, "I'll try to be productive," your mind will interpret almost anything as productivity. But if you define clear actions, study 2 focused hours, complete specific tasks, avoid certain distractions, then honesty becomes precise. You either did it or you did not. Precision eliminates narrative manipulation. You cannot easily lie to yourself when the measurement is clear. The clearer your standards, the harder it becomes to distort reality. Another core element of radical honesty is immediate acknowledgement. The longer you delay admitting a lapse, the easier it becomes to justify it. If you procrastinate for 1 hour and immediately say, "I avoided what I should have done," you interrupt the pattern. But if you allow that hour to pass without acknowledgement, your mind begins constructing protection. It tells you it was necessary. It tells you you deserved it. It tells you it was harmless. Immediate acknowledgement weakens rationalization before it solidifies. Consistency also requires separating explanation from excuse. Explanation identifies cause. Excuse removes responsibility. If you were tired, that is an explanation. If you use tiredness to justify repeated inaction, it becomes an excuse. Radical honesty allows you to recognize factors influencing performance without surrendering control. You can say, "I was low on energy, so I performed below my standard." That statement contains truth and responsibility. It does not blame circumstances entirely. It does not deny the impact of fatigue. It balances reality with ownership. Applying this discipline daily builds internal credibility. Each time you admit a mistake without distortion, you strengthen self, because now your mind knows that you will not hide from reality. That reliability creates stability. You begin trusting your evaluations. You begin trusting your commitments. And when you trust yourself, discipline becomes easier. Not because tasks feel easier, but because your word to yourself carries weight. Radical honesty also requires reviewing patterns instead of isolated events. One unproductive day is information. Repeated unproductive days form a pattern. Discipline demands that you look at trends. Are you consistently distracted at certain times? Are you repeatedly avoiding specific tasks? Are you frequently reacting emotionally in similar situations? Patterns reveal deeper truths about habits and triggers. When you study patterns honestly, you move from reactive correction to strategic adjustment. This discipline strengthens emotional control as well. When you stop lying to yourself, you stop over-dramatizing setbacks. You see them as data, not disasters. If you fail to meet a standard, you analyze it. You adjust. You continue. There is no denial, but there is also no collapse. Emotional stability grows when reality is faced calmly. Radical honesty removes the need for defensive emotion because nothing is being hidden. There will be days when you feel resistance returning. Days when excuses feel tempting. Days when you want to soften your evaluation. That is when discipline matters most. Radical honesty is not proven on easy days. It is proven when discomfort rises, when you are tired, when you are frustrated, when results are slow. Choosing truth in those moments strengthens resilience. It builds mental endurance. It trains you to operate beyond mood. Over time, this daily practice reshapes identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who avoids discomfort. You start seeing yourself as someone who confronts reality directly. Identity shifts, not through affirmations, but through repeated evidence. Each honest evaluation becomes evidence of integrity. Each corrected behavior becomes evidence of growth. And as evidence accumulates, confidence stabilizes. Not inflated confidence based on illusion, but grounded confidence based on proof. Radical honesty also sharpens decision-making. When you clearly understand your weaknesses, you plan accordingly. When you recognize your distractions, you eliminate them strategically. When you know your triggers, you prepare responses in advance. Clarity improves execution. Execution improves results. Results reinforce discipline. This cycle strengthens itself. Eventually, honesty becomes automatic. You no longer need to force evaluation. It becomes part of your thinking. When you notice avoidance, you correct it quickly. When you detect rationalization, you interrupt it. When you fall short, you adjust without drama. Growth accelerates because resistance weakens. You are no longer wasting energy protecting your ego. All energy is directed toward improvement. At this level, self-deception loses its appeal. Temporary comfort feels insignificant compared to long-term strength. You recognize that every honest moment builds advantage. An advantage compounds. Small daily corrections prevent large future regrets. Small acknowledgements prevent deep stagnation. Discipline becomes less about forcing yourself and more about respecting yourself. This is where internal power stabilizes. Not through motivation, not through comparison, not through external validation, but through disciplined self-truth. And when radical honesty becomes your standard, you are prepared for the final stage, integrating this discipline so deeply that it defines how you live, decide, and grow without exception. And when radical honesty becomes your standard, you are prepared for the final stage, integrating this discipline so deeply that it defines how you live, decide, and grow without exception. At this level, honesty is no longer an effort. It becomes your operating system. It influences how you plan your day, how you respond to failure, how you evaluate success, and how you interact with your own ambitions. There is no separation between who you say you are and how you act when no one is watching. Alignment becomes your default state. Living in alignment means your private standards match your public goals. You no longer declare big ambitions while tolerating small habits. You no longer speak about discipline while negotiating with distraction. You no longer blame circumstances for patterns you refuse to correct. Every decision passes through one filter. Is this true to my standards, or is this comfort disguised as logic? That question becomes automatic. And because it becomes automatic, self-correction becomes immediate at this stage. You stop seeking validation to confirm your effort. You know whether you gave your best. You know whether you avoided something difficult. You know whether you improved or repeated old patterns. External praise does not inflate you, and criticism does not break you, because your evaluation system is internal and accurate. That internal accuracy creates emotional stability. You are no longer dependent on perception. You are grounded in truth. Integration also means removing selective honesty. Many people are honest in some areas and deceptive in others. They may be disciplined academically, but dishonest about emotional weakness. They may admit professional shortcomings, but deny personal responsibility in relationships. True integration leaves no blind spots. You examine every major area of your life with the same clarity, effort, habits, reactions, priorities, and values. You stop protecting certain weaknesses simply because they are uncomfortable to confront. Growth becomes holistic rather than partial. This level of honesty reshapes how you handle ambition. You stop fantasizing about outcomes and start measuring inputs. Instead of saying, "I want success," you ask, "Did my actions today reflect that desire?" Instead of saying, "I deserve better," you ask, "Did I perform at a level that earns better?" Ambition becomes grounded in accountability. You understand that potential alone means nothing without aligned behavior. An alignment is proven daily, not declared occasionally. Living without exception also strengthens resilience. When setbacks occur, and they will, you do not collapse into denial or blame. You analyze clearly. You identify the gap. You adjust. There is no dramatic self-pity because you already understand your patterns. There is no exaggerated external blame because you accept your influence. Resilience grows from accurate feedback loops, and radical honesty creates the most accurate feedback loop possible. Over time, this alignment builds a powerful form of confidence. Self-respect is deeper than motivation. It is deeper than hype. It comes from knowing you do not betray your own standards. When you promise effort, you deliver. When you recognize weakness, you address it. When you detect avoidance, you correct it. This consistency builds pride that does not require audience. It is quiet, it is stable, and it cannot be shaken easily because it is built on repeated proof. Integration also eliminates regret. Regret often comes from knowing you avoided necessary truth, knowing you had the capacity but did not demand it from yourself. When you live in alignment, even if outcomes are imperfect, effort is complete. You may fail, but you do not question whether you gave your best. That removes the most painful form of regret, the regret of underperformance due to self-deception. There will still be discomfort. Radical honesty does not remove challenge. It makes challenge productive. You will still encounter fear, fatigue, doubt, and frustration. The difference is that you will no longer hide behind them. You will acknowledge them, analyze them, and move through them. Discomfort becomes data. Emotion becomes information. Weakness becomes direction. Nothing is wasted because nothing is denied. As this discipline deepens, decision-making becomes faster. You do not spend hours justifying choices that contradict your standards. If something misaligns with your values or goals, you recognize it quickly. You eliminate distractions more efficiently. You prioritize more accurately. Clarity saves time. Clarity preserves energy. And both time and energy are resources that compound when used honestly. Eventually, honesty becomes part of your character. People may describe you as disciplined, focused, or strong, but the real strength is internal alignment. You are not performing discipline for appearance. You are practicing integrity for growth. Integrity toward yourself becomes the foundation of all other integrity. When you cannot lie to yourself, you naturally reduce deception in other areas as well. Authenticity expands outward from internal truth. This final stage is not dramatic. It is steady. It is built through daily corrections, daily acknowledgement, daily alignment. There are no shortcuts. There is no sudden transformation. There is only consistent refusal to distort reality. That refusal builds power over time, power over impulse, power over distraction, power over fear, and most importantly, power over self-sabotage. When you live this way, success becomes a byproduct rather than a chase. Improvement becomes constant rather than occasional. Growth becomes inevitable rather than accidental. Because the greatest barrier, self-deception, has been removed. You are no longer fighting illusions. You are working with facts. And facts are controllable when faced directly. This is the true meaning of never lying to yourself. It is not about harshness. It is not about perfection. It is about alignment. It is about ensuring that your words, intentions, and actions move in the same direction. When they do, progress accelerates. When they do not, stagnation follows. The choice repeats daily, and each day you choose truth, you strengthen the foundation of a life built without illusion, a life directed by clarity, disciplined by honesty, and elevated by unwavering alignment.